My name is Sophia. I'm 27 years old, and until recently, I was a daughter with a home. I'd moved back in with my mom temporarily to save for grad school while working as a nurse. Everything changed when she married James and his son Tyler moved in. We were family, or so I thought. Then came that Tuesday night after my shift, when I found all my belongings packed in boxes outside my childhood bedroom. Tyler needed a music studio, and apparently I needed to disappear. Where are you watching from? Hit subscribe if you've ever felt the sting of family betrayal, and stay to hear how I fought back when my own mother chose her stepson over me. After graduating with my nursing degree 4 years ago, I never imagined I'd end up back in my childhood home. I had big dreams of getting my master's degree, becoming a nurse practitioner, and eventually opening my own practice. But between student loans, the skyrocketing cost of rent in our city, and trying to build up savings, I made what seemed like a practical decision at the time. Mom had always said her door was open if I needed to come home for a while. "Sophia, honey, this house will always be your home," she told me when I called her about potentially moving back. "It makes perfect sense for you to save money. We can have our Sunday brunches again just like old times." That was before James Harris entered our lives. Mom met him at the country club where she'd started attending social events with her friends. James owned a successful investment firm, drove an imported luxury car, and took Mom to restaurants where entrees cost more than I made in an hour of overtime. Within 6 months, they were engaged. Within 8, they were married in an extravagant ceremony that felt more like a business networking event than a wedding. I tried to be happy for her. Dad had passed away 7 years ago, and Mom deserved companionship. But everything happened so fast that I barely had a chance to get to know James before he became my stepfather. Even more concerning was that I hadn't even met his son Tyler until the wedding reception, where he gave a speech that seemed more focused on his father's wealth than their relationship. I could tell right away that Tyler had never worked for anything in his life. I told my friend Alyssa over coffee the week after the wedding. He kept talking about his music career, but when I asked what he'd released, he just said he was between projects and that the industry is brutal, man. Alyssa laughed. "Sounds like code for, I've never actually finished anything." I didn't know then how prophetic that observation would become. When I first moved back home, my childhood bedroom remained exactly as I'd left it. The walls were still the soft lavender I'd chosen when I was 16. My bookshelf still held my nursing textbooks alongside my collection of young adult novels. The bulletin board above my desk displayed photos of high school friends, college graduation, and my first day at the hospital in my scrubs. It was my sanctuary filled with memories and the comfort of familiarity. After Mom and James married, he sold his downtown condo and moved into our house. It was spacious enough for all of us with 4 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. Mom and James took the master suite, of course. I had my childhood room. The guest room remained largely untouched. And then there was the small home office that Mom had used for paying bills and organizing family paperwork. "Tyler will be staying with us for a while," James announced over dinner one night about a month after the wedding. "He's between apartments right now." Mom nodded enthusiastically. "We've already set up the office as a bedroom for him. We moved all my paperwork to our bedroom." "That's thoughtful of you," I said, trying to sound sincere. "How long will he be staying?" James shrugged. "As long as he needs to get back on his feet. The music industry can be unpredictable." Tyler moved in the following weekend, bringing with him an astonishing amount of possessions for someone who had supposedly been living in a small apartment. The most concerning items were his numerous musical instruments and equipment, which quickly spread beyond the confines of his room. Within weeks, Tyler's presence had expanded throughout the house. His guitars leaned against walls in the living room. Amplifiers and mysterious black cases with band stickers occupied corners. The dining table often held scattered notebooks with what he called lyrics in progress. At 30 years old, he seemed to have the organizational skills of a teenager. The first major incident occurred when I came home from a 12-hour shift to find Tyler had used my private bathroom. My toiletries were rearranged, wet towels lay on the floor, and unmistakable beard trimmings dotted my sink. When I confronted him, he seemed genuinely confused by my anger. "What's the big deal?" The hallway bathroom was occupied, and James was in the master. I needed to shower before meeting some industry guys. The big deal is that you didn't ask and you left a mess, I explained, trying to remain calm. This is my personal space. Lighten up, he said with a dismissive wave. We're family now, right? I took the issue to Mom later that evening, expecting her support. Sweetie, I think you're overreacting a little, she said while folding laundry. Tyler didn't mean any harm. He's adjusting to living with family after being on his own. He's 30, Mom. He should know basic courtesy. She sighed, setting down the towel she was folding. James and I are trying to make everyone feel welcome here. Tyler is going through a tough time with his career. Could you try to be more understanding? That was the first time I noticed the shift in our relationship. Before James and Tyler, Mom and I had been a team. Now I was increasingly on the outside, expected to accommodate the newcomers without complaint. As weeks passed, Tyler's interest in my bedroom became increasingly obvious. He would make comments whenever he passed my open door. "This room has amazing acoustics," he said one day, snapping his fingers and listening to the sound. "Much better than my converted office space. The natural light in here would be perfect for recording videos," he observed another time. "My room faces north, so it's always too dark." Each comment sent a small chill through me, but I dismissed my concerns as paranoia. Surely my mother would never allow someone to take my space, especially not for something as insubstantial as a hobby. I couldn't have been more wrong. The tensions in our newly blended family continued to escalate over the following weeks. What had started as minor irritations with Tyler's entitlement evolved into something more concerning. The dynamic shifted dramatically during a family dinner in late March, when Tyler made an announcement that would ultimately lead to my displacement. James had prepared an elaborate meal, something he enjoyed doing to showcase his culinary skills on Sunday evenings. Mom sat beside him wearing a new dress and jewelry that had become standard since their marriage. I had just finished a weekend shift rotation and was exhausted but trying to participate in the family ritual. Tyler arrived late to dinner as usual, but with an unusual energy about him. "I have an announcement," he said, barely waiting until we'd all served our plates. "I've been doing some soul searching and I've decided to fully commit to my music career again. I'm going all in this time." James set down his wine glass with deliberate precision. "We've heard this before, son. What's different now? I've been connecting with some serious producers online." Tyler explained, his voice animated. "One of them even worked with Justin Palmer last year. They've heard my demos and think I have potential, real potential this time." "That sounds promising," Mom said, glancing at James with hopeful eyes. "It is," Tyler continued. "But they said my recordings need to be more professional. Studio quality. That's what's been holding me back all this time." James leaned back in his chair, his expression skeptical. "And I suppose you're about to tell us how much professional studio time costs." Tyler shook his head. "No, Dad. I've done the research. For what a few months of studio rentals would cost, I could build my own recording space. A real home studio with sound treatment, proper equipment, everything I need." "And where exactly would this studio go?" James asked the obvious question. That's when I noticed Tyler's eyes flick toward the ceiling in the direction of my bedroom. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "Well, the office is too small," Tyler said carefully. "And it's right next to your bedroom, so noise would be an issue." "The garage would work," I suggested immediately. "It's separate from the house, so sound wouldn't disturb anyone." Tyler grimaced. "The garage has terrible temperature control and concrete flooring that creates echo. Plus, it's dusty and would ruin the equipment." "What about renting a small commercial space?" I offered, increasingly uncomfortable with where this conversation seemed to be headed. "That defeats the purpose of saving money," Tyler countered. "Besides, creativity strikes at all hours. I need access to my studio whenever inspiration hits." James studied his son carefully. "Before we discuss location, I need to know you're serious this time. You've started and abandoned at least 3 music careers that I've funded." "This time is different," Tyler insisted. "I've made connections. I've been studying production techniques. I just need the right space to create. If," James emphasized the word, "we were to support this venture, I'd need to see a business plan. Goals, timelines, expected outcomes. And you'd need to show progress." "Absolutely," Tyler agreed quickly. "I can have that for you by the end of the week." Throughout this conversation, I noticed Mom remained largely silent, occasionally nodding along. When Tyler's gaze repeatedly drifted toward the ceiling above us, toward my room, she didn't seem troubled. That night, I woke around 2 in the morning to the sound of voices in the hallway outside my bedroom. Quietly moving to the door, I could hear Mom and James having a hushed conversation. It would mean so much to him, Mom was saying, and it could be the opportunity he needs to finally succeed. But what about Sophia? James asked, his voice lowered. She's an adult with a good job, Mom replied. She was planning to move out eventually for grad school anyway. I don't know, Caroline. It seems unfair to rush her. We could help her with the deposit on a new place, and Tyler really does need a proper space if he's going to take this seriously. I stood frozen behind my door, unable to believe what I was hearing. My own mother was advocating for giving my room to Tyler for his latest whim. I waited until their footsteps retreated to the master bedroom before I sank back onto my bed, hurt and bewildered. The following days brought a series of small invasions. I'd come home to find things slightly moved in my room as if someone had been examining the space. A tape measure appeared and disappeared from the hallway table. Tyler began referring to my room as the upstairs bedroom, rather than Sophia's room during conversations. When I tried to discuss my concerns with Mom, she became increasingly evasive. No one's making any decisions about anything, she assured me, though her eyes wouldn't meet mine. James is still considering whether to support Tyler's studio idea at all. But I noticed how she'd stopped referring to my bedroom as mine, how she'd casually mention "when you find your own place" in conversations. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. My work schedule became both a blessing and a curse during this time. As a nurse working rotating shifts at the hospital, I often spent long hours away from home. The distance provided relief from the growing tension, but also meant I wasn't present to defend my territory. One evening, I returned from work to find Tyler and a friend in the living room surrounded by acoustic foam panels and equipment catalogs. "This foam would be perfect for the upstairs room," his friend was saying as I walked in. "The dimensions are ideal for a vocal booth in that corner." They fell silent when they noticed me standing in the doorway, still in my scrubs. Tyler hastily gathered up the catalogs. "Just exploring options," he said with an unconvincing smile. "Nothing decided yet." That week at work was particularly challenging. We were understaffed, and I took on extra shifts to both help out and avoid the increasing discomfort at home. On Wednesday, we had a young patient, only 19, come in after a serious car accident. I stayed 2 hours past my shift to help stabilize him and comfort his terrified parents. When I finally arrived home emotionally and physically drained, I found Tyler playing guitar in the living room at full volume despite the late hour. When I asked him to keep it down, he responded with visible irritation. "I'm working here. This is important for my future. Some of us have jobs that actually save lives." I snapped back, too exhausted to filter my words. "And we need sleep to do them properly." The look of contempt he gave me made it clear that in his mind, his music ambitions far outweighed my career reality. More troubling was Mom's response when she emerged from her bedroom to investigate our raised voices. "Sophia Tyler is pursuing his passion," she scolded. "A little understanding would go a long way." As I retreated to my room, I realized with growing dread that my childhood home no longer felt safe or supportive. The foundation of my relationship with Mom was cracking beneath the weight of her new marriage and the intruder who seemed determined to claim my space both physically and emotionally. I'll never forget the day everything fell apart. It was a Tuesday in April, and I had just finished a grueling 12-hour night shift in the intensive care unit. We had been short-staffed as usual, and I had taken on the care of an additional patient, bringing my total to 4 critically ill people who needed constant monitoring and care. One of my patients had coded twice during the night, requiring resuscitation efforts that left my back aching and arms trembling. Another had been a young woman close to my age with severe COVID complications who was terrified of being intubated. I had spent nearly an hour holding her hand and explaining the procedure, promising I would be there when she woke up. By the time I handed off my patients to the day shift nurses, I was operating on pure adrenaline and caffeine. My mind was clouded with exhaustion as I trudged to my car in the hospital parking garage. All I could think about was crawling into my bed, pulling the lavender comforter over my head, and sleeping for at least 8 hours before my next shift. The drive home was a blur. I remember turning on loud music and cracking the windows to keep myself alert enough to navigate safely. I remember stopping at a red light and nearly dozing off before the honk of the car behind me jolted me back to consciousness. I remember the relief I felt when I finally turned onto our street, knowing that sleep was just minutes away. That relief evaporated the moment I walked through the front door of my home and saw the boxes. At first, my exhausted brain couldn't process what I was seeing. There were at least 10 cardboard boxes stacked in the hallway outside my bedroom, some sealed with packing tape, others still open with contents visible. I recognized my winter sweaters in one, books from my shelf in another. "What is this?" I whispered to myself, a cold dread spreading through my chest. I moved closer, peering into the boxes. My possessions had been packed up with minimal care. Photo frames were stacked on top of each other without protective wrapping. Books were crammed in haphazardly, their spines at risk of damage. "Mom!" I called out, my voice catching. "What's going on?" I heard movement from the kitchen and Mom appeared in the hallway. She was wearing one of her new designer outfits, hair perfectly styled, makeup flawless. But her expression was a mixture of discomfort and forced determination. "Sophia, you're home earlier than I expected," she said, her voice unnaturally high. "We were going to have everything ready to talk to you when you woke up." "Ready for what?" I asked, though a sickening realization was already forming. "Why are my things in boxes?" Mom took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders in a way I'd seen her do before difficult conversations with Dad when he was still alive. "James and I have been discussing the future, and we've made some decisions about the house," she began, sounding like she was reciting a rehearsed speech. "Tyler has shown real commitment to his music career. He's presented a business plan to James, connected with industry professionals, and demonstrated that he's serious this time." "What does that have to do with my things being packed up?" I demanded, though I already knew the answer. "Tyler needs a proper studio to pursue his career," she continued. "We've looked at all the options, and the upstairs bedroom is really the only suitable space. It has the right dimensions, natural soundproofing with the carpeting, and it's away from the master bedroom, so noise won't be an issue." "The upstairs bedroom," I repeated numbly. "You mean my bedroom, the bedroom I've had since I was a child." "Sophia, you're a grown woman with a career," Mom said, her tone sharpening. "Tyler is trying to build his future. James and I have decided that it's time for you to find your own place." The bluntness of her statement hit me like a physical blow. I staggered backward, leaning against the wall for support. "You're kicking me out for Tyler's hobby." "It's not a hobby," she corrected quickly. "It's his career path, and we're not kicking you out. We're helping you transition to independence. There's a difference." "When?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "When am I supposed to leave?" Mom glanced toward the front door uncomfortably. "Well, Tyler's equipment is being delivered tomorrow. He's already paid deposits that can't be refunded, and the sound treatment installation is scheduled for Thursday." "Tomorrow?" I stared at her in disbelief. "You expect me to find a place to live by tomorrow?" Before she could answer, the front door opened and James walked in with Tyler following behind. They both froze momentarily upon seeing me standing amidst the boxes, clearly not having expected me to be home. "Sophia," James nodded awkwardly. "Caroline, I thought we agreed to have this conversation when Sophia was rested." "She came home early," Mom said defensively. Tyler didn't even attempt to look apologetic. Instead, he brushed past me toward my room, our shoulders nearly colliding. "I need to take some measurements for the equipment," he said, as if this were a perfectly normal situation. "That's my room," I finally shouted, emotion breaking through my shock. "You can't just take it." "Actually," James interjected, his businessman's voice calm and measured, "this is our house and we've made a decision about how to utilize the space." I turned to my mother, tears now streaming down my face. "Mom, please. I just finished a nightmare shift. I have nowhere to go on such short notice. This is my home." For a brief moment, I saw uncertainty flicker in her eyes, but then she glanced at James and her expression hardened again. We understand this is difficult, she said, reaching into her purse. That's why we want to help you with the transition. She withdrew a check and held it out to me. I made no move to take it. This should cover a security deposit and first month's rent on a nice apartment, she explained. James has a colleague in real estate who can show you some options this afternoon. This afternoon? I repeated incredulously. I haven't slept in over 24 hours. I'm supposed to go apartment hunting right now. You can stay in a hotel for a few days if needed, James offered as if this were a generous concession. We'll cover that too. Throughout this conversation, Tyler had disappeared into my bedroom. I could hear him moving around inside, likely already planning his studio layout. The casual audacity of it made my blood boil. I can't believe this is happening, I said, looking directly at my mother. Dad would never have done this to me. It was a low blow, and I saw her flinch. But instead of reconsidering, she straightened her spine and adopted the tone she used when her decision was final. Your father isn't here, Sophia, and you need to accept that things change. Families evolve. You're a nurse with a good salary. It's time for you to stand on your own. Those words cut deeper than anything else she could have said. The implication that I had been freeloading rather than actively saving for my education while contributing to household expenses was both unfair and untrue. Fine, I finally said, my voice hollow. I'll pack the rest of my things. I pushed past them toward my bedroom, where I found Tyler measuring the windows, presumably for blackout curtains. Without a word, I began gathering the items that hadn't yet been boxed up. My hands shook with exhaustion and emotion as I emptied drawers and cleared surfaces. Tyler watched me for a moment, then had the audacity to say, "Don't worry about the furniture. We can use most of it for the studio setup." I stopped what I was doing and stared at him. "You're taking my furniture too." He shrugged. "The bed is going to the guest room. Your desk works perfectly for the mixing equipment, and the bookshelves can hold my vinyl collection and recording gear." The casual way he discussed repurposing my personal space made something snap inside me. I grabbed my nurse's bag, which still held my wallet and essential documents, and the small suitcase I used for overnight shifts. Without another word to any of them, I walked out, leaving most of my possessions behind in those hastily packed boxes. As I pulled out of the driveway, I caught a glimpse of my mother standing in the doorway. She raised her hand in what might have been a wave or perhaps a gesture asking me to stop. I didn't slow down to find out which. The first few days after being thrown out of my childhood home passed in a blur of shock, exhaustion, and desperate improvisation. I called Alyssa from the parking lot of a coffee shop where I'd stopped to gather my thoughts, barely able to form coherent sentences through my tears. "They did what?" she exclaimed when I finally managed to explain what had happened. "Your own mother kicked you out for her stepson's music studio, with no notice." "I don't know what to do," I admitted, my voice small and broken. "I have a shift tomorrow night. I haven't slept in over 24 hours. I can't think straight enough to apartment hunt." "Come stay with me," Alyssa offered without hesitation. "It's a studio apartment, so you'll have to sleep on my futon, but it's yours as long as you need it." That night, curled up on Alyssa's uncomfortable futon with a borrowed blanket, the full weight of what had happened finally crashed down on me. My body shook with silent sobs as I tried not to wake my friend. It wasn't just about losing my room or being inconvenienced. It was the profound betrayal by the one person who was supposed to love me unconditionally. The check Mom had tried to hand me remained untouched in my bag. Taking it felt like accepting that what they'd done was somehow okay. It wasn't. No amount of money could compensate for the way they had discarded me. Sleep eluded me despite my exhaustion. Each time I began to drift off, I'd jolt awake with a racing heart, disoriented and unsure of where I was. By morning, I had maybe accumulated 2 hours of fragmented rest. "You look terrible," Alyssa said bluntly when she found me staring vacantly at the coffee maker. "You can't go to work like this." "I don't have a choice," I replied. "We're already short-staffed. If I call out, it affects everyone." "If you make a medication error because you're exhausted, it affects your patients," she countered. "Call in sick, just for today." But I couldn't. Work was the one place where I still had purpose and control. So I showered, borrowed some of Alyssa's clothes since most of mine were still in those boxes, and drove to the hospital like a zombie. The shift was a disaster waiting to happen. I found myself reading the same medication order 3 times before it registered. I had to ask patients to repeat themselves because my mind kept wandering. Worst of all, I nearly administered the wrong dose of insulin to an elderly patient before a fellow nurse caught the error. Sophia, Denise, our charge nurse, called me into the break room after the near miss. "What's going on with you today? This isn't like you at all." I tried to maintain my professional composure, but as soon as Denise's kind eyes met mine, the facade crumbled. Through broken sentences and fresh tears, I explained what had happened. "I have nowhere to go," I concluded. "I'm sleeping on a friend's futon. Most of my things are still at my mom's house. I can't even think about apartment hunting when I'm this exhausted." Denise listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly concerned. "First things first," she said when I finished. "You're going home now. I'll adjust the staffing. You're in no condition to care for patients, and that's not a criticism. It's a medical fact." "But the shift," I protested weakly. "Will be covered," she said firmly. "Second, you're not going back to your friend's futon. You're coming to my house. I have a proper guest room that no one is using, and you're going to sleep for as long as your body needs." I was too drained to argue. Denise called her husband to let him know I was coming, and by early afternoon I was tucked into a comfortable bed in a quiet room with blackout curtains. I slept for nearly 14 hours straight. During the following days, I sent several texts and tried calling my mother. Most went unanswered. When she did respond, her messages were brief and devoid of emotion. "The rest of your things are in the garage. Let me know when you want to pick them up." "Found some of your mail. Where should I forward it?" Not once did she ask if I was okay or where I was staying. It was as if the daughter she had raised for 27 years had become nothing more than an administrative loose end to tie up. Through social media, I caught glimpses of what was happening at my former home. Mom posted photos of Tyler's exciting new studio project, showing the transformation of my bedroom. My lavender walls had been painted a dark gray. My desk, as Tyler had said, now held mixing equipment and monitors. In one photo, I could see my childhood bulletin board in the background, now stripped of my memories and covered with what looked like schedules and business cards. Each image was a fresh wound, a visual confirmation that I had been erased and replaced. The captions made it worse. "So proud of Tyler pursuing his dreams and supporting young talent in our blended family." The comments section filled with congratulations, none of the commenters aware of what that support had cost. As the initial shock began to fade, the practical challenges of my situation became increasingly apparent. Apartment hunting in our city was a competitive nightmare under normal circumstances. With limited time, a disrupted work schedule, and emotional trauma weighing me down, it seemed nearly impossible. Every available rental within my budget was either in an unsafe neighborhood, had serious maintenance issues, or required a lengthy commute to the hospital. Application fees quickly depleted my immediate cash reserves, and each rejection due to stronger applicants chipped away at my already fragile state. Alyssa was endlessly patient, but after 2 weeks of couch surfing between her apartment and Denise's guest room, I could sense the arrangement wasn't sustainable. Both women had their own lives, relationships, and routines that my presence was disrupting. "You should use the check," Alyssa suggested gently one evening as we scrolled through rental listings that all seemed out of reach. "I know it feels like accepting what they did, but it's your money. You deserve it." "That money was meant for my education," I said bitterly. "Now it has to go toward basic housing because my own mother threw me out." The financial stress compounded everything else. My carefully constructed budget had been built around minimal housing costs while living at home. Now every dollar that would have gone toward my graduate program was being redirected to survival expenses and application fees. Rock bottom came 3 weeks after my displacement, when both Alyssa and Denise had family visiting from out of town. Too proud to ask anyone else for help and unwilling to explain my humiliating situation to more people, I spent 2 nights sleeping in my car in the hospital parking garage between shifts. I used the staff locker room to shower and stored a change of clothes in my locker. On the second morning, I woke with a stiff neck and swollen eyes to find a security guard tapping on my window. The humiliation of having to explain that I, a healthcare professional responsible for saving lives, was homeless was almost unbearable. That afternoon, sitting in a cafe using the free Wi-Fi to search for apartments I couldn't afford, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Sophia Marshall?" an elderly woman's voice asked when I answered. "Yes, this is Sophia," I replied cautiously. "This is your grandmother Eleanor," the voice said. "Your mother's mother. We need to talk about what Caroline has done." The call from my grandmother Eleanor came at the exact moment I needed it most. I hadn't spoken to her regularly since high school, not because of any conflict, but due to geographical distance and Mom gradually limiting family connections after Dad died. "How did you find out what happened?" I asked, still stunned to be hearing her voice. "I called the house last week to check on Caroline, and that man James answered." She explained, her voice tight with barely contained anger. "I asked to speak with you, and he very curtly informed me that you no longer resided there, and that I should update my contact information." She paused, and I could hear her taking a calming breath. "When I demanded to know what happened, he gave me some nonsense about you deciding it was time to be independent. But I know my granddaughter, and I know you wouldn't just disappear without telling me. So I kept calling until Caroline finally picked up and told me the truth." "And what truth did she tell you?" I asked, curious about how my mother had framed the situation. "Some ridiculous story about needing your room for her stepson's music career," grandmother said dismissively. But even in her version, I could hear what really happened. She chose that man and his son over her own daughter. The simple validation of hearing someone else name the betrayal brought fresh tears to my eyes. For weeks, I'd been questioning whether I was overreacting, whether I should have been more understanding of the family's needs. Hearing my grandmother's righteous indignation confirmed that my feelings were justified. "Where are you staying, Sophia?" she asked, her tone softening. I hesitated, embarrassed to admit the reality of my situation. "I'm between places right now, staying with friends mostly." "That ends today," she declared with the same decisiveness I remembered from childhood visits. "I have a guest room that's sitting empty, and it's yours for as long as you need it. No arguments." "Grandma, you live 45 minutes from the hospital," I protested weakly. "And I wouldn't want to impose. First, 45 minutes is nothing. Second, it's not an imposition when it's family. Real family, not whatever travesty Caroline is playing at right now." Her voice cracked slightly. "Please, Sophia, let me help you." That evening, I drove to my grandmother's modest but well-maintained ranch house in the suburbs, the same home where my mother had grown up. As I pulled into the driveway, Grandma stood waiting on the porch, her silver hair neatly styled, wearing a cardigan despite the mild spring evening. When I stepped out of the car carrying my pathetic collection of possessions, she didn't hesitate. She walked straight to me and wrapped me in a hug that smelled of the same lavender perfume she'd worn my entire life. I broke down in her arms, releasing weeks of pent-up grief. There," she soothed, patting my back. "You're home now." The guest room she'd prepared was small but cozy, with a double bed covered in a handmade quilt and walls adorned with family photos. To my surprise, many of the photos featured me from infancy through college graduation. "I've always kept track of your milestones," she explained when she noticed me examining them. "Even when your mother started sending fewer updates." After helping me settle in, she insisted on making us dinner, and we sat at her kitchen table as I recounted the full story of my expulsion from my childhood home. "Your mother has always been susceptible to strong personalities," Grandma said thoughtfully when I finished. "After your father died, I worried about who might come into her life next. Your dad was a good man who balanced her tendency to be swayed by status and appearances." "She's completely different now," I said. "The way she dresses, talks, even her values seem to have changed." Grandma nodded sadly. "I noticed the same thing when she started dating James. But you should know something, Sophia. You're not the only one she's pushed aside since this marriage." She rose from the table and retrieved a small photo album from a drawer. Opening it, she showed me pictures of family gatherings from holidays past, everyone smiling around a dinner table. "Your mother hasn't invited me to the house since the wedding," she said quietly. "When I call, she's always just heading out, or too busy to talk. Last Christmas, I received a gift basket from a department store with a pre-printed card. No personal visit, not even a handwritten note." I stared at her in disbelief. "She cut you off too?" "Not completely," Grandma clarified, "but enough that I recognize the pattern. James has isolated her from anyone who knew her before, anyone who might question his influence." The realization that my grandmother had been experiencing a similar rejection softened some of the sharp edges of my pain. I wasn't alone in this. I hadn't imagined the dramatic personality shift in my mother. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks, in a room that, while not my childhood bedroom, still held the comfort of family history and unconditional acceptance. The following morning, over coffee, Grandma introduced a new topic. "My neighbor Katie is coming over for lunch today," she mentioned casually. "I think you should meet her." "That's nice," I said, not thinking much of it. "Is she a close friend?" "She is," Grandma nodded. "But more relevantly, she's a lawyer who specializes in tenant rights and housing disputes." I nearly choked on my coffee. "Grandma, I appreciate the thought, but I'm not sure I want to get into a legal battle with Mom and James." "Just talk to her," Grandma urged. "You don't have to decide anything today, but you should know your options." Katie arrived precisely at noon, a woman in her mid-40s with practical business casual attire and a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded me of some of the best nurses I'd worked with. After introductions and some general conversation over lunch, she shifted to the reason for our meeting. "Your grandmother has told me a bit about your situation," she said, her tone professional but kind. "I'd like to hear your version of events if you're comfortable sharing." For the third time in as many days, I recounted the story of being summarily evicted from my home. Katie listened attentively, occasionally jotting notes on a small pad. "How long had you been living there since moving back home?" she asked when I finished. "About 14 months, I replied. "And you contributed to household expenses?" "Yes, I paid a portion of utilities and bought groceries regularly. We didn't have a formal arrangement, but I have bank statements showing regular transfers to Mom for household contribution." Katie nodded, making another note. "Did you receive any written notice before being told to leave?" "No, nothing. Just came home to find my things packed up." "And this was your established residence. You received mail there, had your belongings there, slept there regularly?" "Yes, to all of that." Katie set down her pen and looked at me directly. "Sophia, what happened to you was an illegal eviction. Even without a formal lease as an established resident, you were entitled to proper notice under state law, typically at least 30 days. They violated your rights as a tenant." I blinked in surprise. "But it's their house." "Ownership of the property doesn't negate tenant protection laws," she explained. "When they allowed you to establish residency, certain legal protections automatically applied. By forcing you out without notice, they broke the law." A spark of anger ignited within me, different from the hurt and betrayal I'd been feeling. This was righteous indignation at having been wronged not just emotionally, but legally. "What can I do about it?" I asked. "You have options," Katie said. "We could file a complaint for illegal eviction seeking damages for your costs related to emergency housing storage of belongings, application fees for new housing, and emotional distress. Given the circumstances, we'd have a strong case." The thought of confronting Mom and James through legal means was both terrifying and oddly empowering. For weeks, I'd been feeling like a victim with no recourse. Now I was being told I had rights that had been violated, and there were consequences for those violations. "I need to think about this," I said finally. "Of course," Katie agreed, sliding a business card across the table. "Take all the time you need. But if you decide to proceed, don't wait too long. There are time limitations on these claims." After Katie left, my grandmother and I sat in contemplative silence for several minutes. "What are you thinking?" she finally asked. "I'm thinking that I'm tired of being the only one suffering consequences from this situation," I said slowly. "They've gone on with their lives like nothing happened while mine has been completely upended." Grandma reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. But remember, standing up for yourself isn't the same as seeking revenge. The goal should be justice, not punishment. Over the next few days, I reconnected with other family members who had been similarly sidelined since Mom's marriage. Dad's sister, Aunt Julia, had apparently been uninvited from family gatherings after questioning James's business practices. My cousin Michael hadn't received responses to his last several messages to Mom. Like pieces of a puzzle, our separate experiences formed a clearer picture of the systematic isolation that had occurred. These connections became my new support network. Aunt Julia helped me retrieve the rest of my belongings from Mom's garage one day when we knew she and James would be at a country club event. Michael, who worked in finance, reviewed my budget and helped me create a new financial plan that would allow me to eventually resume saving for graduate school. With each conversation and small act of assistance, I felt my sense of family being rebuilt not around the mother who had rejected me, but around those who chose to show up when I needed them most. A week after meeting Katie, I called her office and scheduled a proper consultation. By then, my initial shock had been replaced by a clear-eyed determination. I wasn't going to let what happened be brushed aside as a family squabble. It was time to stand up for myself in a language James would understand legal and financial consequences. The certified letter arrived at my mother's house on a Thursday afternoon. I know this because James called me within hours of its delivery, his voice a mixture of outrage and disbelief. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded without preamble when I answered my phone. "I assume you're referring to the letter from my attorney." I replied, my heart pounding despite my attempt at a calm tone. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "You're threatening to sue your own mother over what exactly being asked to be an independent adult." "I wasn't asked, James. I was illegally evicted without proper notice, which violated state tenant protection laws. The letter explains that quite clearly." "We gave you money to find a new place," he countered. "Offering money after the fact doesn't make the eviction legal," I explained, reciting what Katie had coached me to say. "And it certainly doesn't compensate for the disruption to my life emergency housing costs and emotional distress." There was a brief silence, and I could almost hear the businessman in him calculating the situation. "What do you want, Sophia?" he finally asked, his voice lower and more controlled. "The letter outlines our terms for settlement," I said simply. "I suggest you read it carefully and consult with your own attorney." After hanging up, I sat trembling in my grandmother's living room, equal parts terrified and exhilarated. Standing up to James was something I'd never done before. The fact that I'd left him momentarily speechless felt like a small victory in itself. My phone immediately lit up with texts from my mother. "How could you do this to us? After everything we've done for you." James is furious. "This isn't how family treats each other." The irony of her last message almost made me laugh out loud. Instead, I sent a single reply. "I'm available to meet and discuss a resolution if you'd like. Otherwise, please direct all communication to my attorney." The legal letter Katie had drafted detailed the specifics of the illegal eviction and outlined our settlement demands: compensation for 3 months of rental expenses at market rate for a comparable one-bedroom apartment, reimbursement for all housing application fees, storage costs for belongings, and additional damages for emotional distress. The total came to just under $20,000, a figure that Katie believed was reasonable given the circumstances. "We're not actually going to court unless absolutely necessary," she had explained during our meeting. "Settlement negotiations are far more common, especially in cases like this, where the facts are straightforward and the defendant has resources." The following day, I received a call from an unknown number that turned out to be James's attorney. The conversation was brief and surprisingly respectful. He requested a meeting to discuss an amicable resolution to this unfortunate situation. Katie accompanied me to the meeting, which was held at a neutral location, a conference room in a downtown office building. James's attorney, a polished man in his 50s named Lawrence Bennett, came alone. Notably absent were James and my mother. "My client believes there's been a misunderstanding," Bennett began after pleasantries were exchanged. "The Marshall Harris family never intended to violate any housing regulations." Katie smiled thinly. Intent is irrelevant to the facts. Ms. Marshall was an established tenant who was removed from her residence without proper notice, resulting in significant hardship. The family did provide financial assistance, Bennett countered. An after-the-fact offer that Ms. Marshall did not accept, Katie replied, and which was inadequate to address the full scope of damages. The meeting continued in this professional but tense back and forth for nearly an hour. Eventually, Bennett presented their counteroffer, $12,000, as a goodwill gesture to resolve the misunderstanding. Katie and I had discussed this scenario in advance. We had agreed that anything over $15,000 would be acceptable. I remained silent as she negotiated, eventually getting Bennett up to $16,000 with a non-disclosure agreement that would prevent me from discussing the settlement publicly. "We'll need to review the specific language of the NDA," Katie insisted. "Ms. Marshall won't agree to anything that prevents her from acknowledging the basic facts of the situation to family members." Bennett conceded this point, and by the end of the meeting we had a verbal agreement in principle. Both attorneys would draft the necessary paperwork, and we'd reconvene in a week to finalize everything. As we left the building, I felt a curious mixture of emotions. Relief that a resolution was in sight, vindication that my claims were being taken seriously, and lingering sadness that it had come to this with my own family. "You did well in there," Katie commented as we walked to the parking garage. "It's not easy to sit through those negotiations, especially when it's personal." "I kept thinking about what Grandma said," I admitted, "about the difference between justice and revenge. I don't want to hurt Mom, but I do want her and James to understand that actions have consequences." The day before our scheduled follow-up meeting, I received a text from my mother asking to meet privately at a coffee shop near her house. After consulting with Katie, who advised me that I could meet but should avoid discussing settlement details, I agreed. Mom was already seated at a corner table when I arrived, her hands wrapped around a mug that appeared untouched. She looked thinner than I remembered, and there was a tightness around her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Thank you for coming," she said as I slid into the seat across from her. "Of course," I replied neutrally. An awkward silence stretched between us before she finally spoke again. "I never thought it would come to this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Legal letters and lawyers. It feels so cold. Colder than coming home to find my belongings in boxes," I couldn't help asking. She winced. "I know how that must have looked. But you have to understand, James has always provided for Tyler, and this music studio means everything to him. More than your relationship with your daughter meant to you." Mom shifted uncomfortably. "It's complicated, Sophia. James controls all our finances. The house is in his name. I don't have my own money anymore, not like I did when your father was alive." This revelation hit me like a punch to the stomach. My mother, who had always been independent and strong-willed, was admitting to financial dependency that bordered on control. "That's concerning Mom," I said carefully. "That doesn't sound like a healthy situation." "It's just how James prefers to manage things," she said, quickly defensive even now. "The point is, I couldn't just say no when he and Tyler decided on the studio plan." "You could have warned me," I pointed out. "You could have given me time to find another place. You could have helped me move instead of having me come home to that humiliation." Tears welled in her eyes. "You're right. I handled it terribly. I was caught between what James wanted and what I knew was right for you." For a brief moment I saw a flicker of my real mother, the woman who had raised me before James entered our lives. But then her expression shifted, a mask of rationalization sliding into place. "But you have to admit you're 27, Sophia. Most people your age aren't living at home anymore. Maybe this was the push you needed to be fully independent." And just like that, the moment of genuine remorse vanished. She was still justifying their actions, still unable to simply acknowledge the wrong that had been done. "I had a plan, Mom," I said quietly. "I was saving for graduate school, not mooching. I contributed to the household. I was a tenant with rights, not a child being asked to leave the nest." She had no response to this, and we sat in uncomfortable silence until I finally asked the question that had been haunting me. How is it possible that after 27 years as my mother Tyler became more important to you in less than one? That's not fair, she protested weakly. Neither was what happened to me, I replied. Neither is what's happened to Grandma or Aunt Julia or anyone else who's been pushed out of your life since James came into it. She looked genuinely surprised. What are you talking about? Have you not noticed that you've systematically cut ties with everyone who knew you before James? Everyone who might question his influence over you? Mom shook her head, but I could see uncertainty in her eyes. That's not true. I've just been busy with the new marriage building our life together. When was the last time you called Grandma or visited her? She's your mother, Mom. I've been meaning to, she said feebly. Time just gets away from me. The conversation continued in this vein with small admissions that never quite became full accountability. By the time we parted, it was clear that while Mom might have some regrets about how things had happened, she wasn't ready to truly acknowledge the harm done or make meaningful amends. The settlement was finalized the following week. James did not attend the meeting, sending his attorney with signed paperwork and a cashier's check. My mother was also absent. The terms were as we had negotiated $16,000 in exchange for releasing any further claims with an NDA that specifically allowed me to discuss the basic facts with family members. As Katie and I left the final meeting check in hand, she asked me how I felt. Hollow, I admitted. Winning doesn't feel like I expected it to. It rarely does in family matters, she said wisely. But remember, this wasn't about winning. It was about standing up for yourself and establishing boundaries. In that, you've succeeded completely. When I showed the check to my grandmother that evening, she studied it thoughtfully before handing it back. Your education fund is back on track, she observed. Just as it should be. I'll need to use some for an apartment deposit, I said. No, she shook her head firmly. You'll stay here until you've found exactly the right place, not just the first available option. And your apartment deposit will be my housewarming gift to you. I started to protest, but she held up her hand. Let me do this, Sophia. You fought for justice. Let me help with the healing. 6 months after being thrown out of my childhood home, I sat cross-legged on the floor of my new apartment unpacking the last of my books. The space was small but entirely mine, a one-bedroom unit in a well-maintained building with a reasonable commute to the hospital. The walls were painted a soft sage green, a deliberate departure from the lavender of my old room. I wanted something completely new, unconnected to the past. On my desk sat an acceptance letter to the graduate program I'd been working toward all along. The settlement money combined with what I'd managed to save since then had secured my educational future despite the detour. Classes would begin in the spring semester, allowing me to adjust my work schedule at the hospital to part-time. My relationship with my mother had settled into a state of cautious distance. We exchanged occasional text messages, mostly surface-level updates about weather or work. She never asked about my new apartment, and I never volunteered information about it. There was an unspoken boundary between us now, a protective measure on my part, and perhaps a form of denial on hers. Through family connections, I'd learned that all was not perfect in the Harris household. Tyler's music studio venture had predictably fizzled within months. According to Aunt Julia, who heard from a friend in their social circle, the expensive equipment now sat gathering dust, and Tyler had moved on to an interest in film production that would undoubtedly require new investment. More concerning were the rumors of tension between Mom and James, arguments about money, and Tyler's continued dependence. I took no pleasure in these reports. Despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to wish unhappiness on my mother. I simply noted the information as confirmation that the patterns I'd observed were continuing and felt grateful to be removed from that toxic dynamic. My relationship with my grandmother, on the other hand, had flourished. Our Sunday dinners had become a cherished ritual, a reclaiming of family tradition that had been disrupted. She delighted in helping me furnish my apartment, often showing up with small treasures she'd found at estate sales or items she'd saved from my childhood that Mom had discarded. I kept this for you, she told me one afternoon, presenting a small wooden jewelry box that had belonged to my father's mother. Caroline was going to donate it after your dad passed, but I couldn't bear to see it go to strangers. These rescued mementos helped heal some of the wounds left by my abrupt displacement. They were tangible reminders that even when belongings are taken, memories and connections remain. Katie, who had begun as my attorney, had become a friend and mentor. Our coffee meetings continued long after the legal matter was settled, evolving into discussions about life, career aspirations, and the nature of family. She helped me understand that family is not merely defined by blood, but by actions, by who shows up when you're in need. The people who gather around you in crisis. She told me once, those are your true family. And my family had indeed expanded beyond traditional boundaries. Alyssa and Denise, who had sheltered me in those first desperate days, remained steadfast friends. My reconnection with extended family members like Aunt Julia and Cousin Michael had brought new richness to my life. Even my colleagues at the hospital, who had supported me through the worst of the crisis with shift trades and emotional support, had become something more than coworkers. The most profound change, however, was within myself. The betrayal had forced me to confront hard truths about relationships and expectations. I had learned to set boundaries, to advocate for myself, and to recognize when love came with unhealthy conditions. The process of rebuilding after such a fundamental rejection had revealed strengths I hadn't known I possessed. Where once I might have sacrificed my own needs to maintain peace, I now stood firmly in my worth. Where I had once sought approval, I now sought authenticity in relationships. One evening, as autumn leaves began to fall, I received a text from my mother that was different from our usual exchanges. "I miss you, Sophia. I made mistakes. Can we talk sometime?" I sat with the message for a long time before responding. The old me would have jumped at this opening, eager to repair the relationship at any cost. The new me recognized that reconciliation, if it came, would need to be founded on honesty and accountability, not merely the passage of time. "I'm open to talking," I finally replied, "but I need to know that you understand what happened and why it was wrong." Her response didn't come immediately, and I didn't expect it to. Real change, I had learned, rarely happens quickly. It comes in small realizations, in quiet moments of reflection, in the gradual erosion of denial. Whether my mother would ever fully acknowledge her role in what happened remained to be seen. But I had discovered that my healing did not depend on her recognition. I had found my way forward regardless, building a life on a foundation of self-respect that no one could pack into boxes or remove without notice. As I placed the last book on my shelf, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. The past 6 months had been the most challenging and transformative of my life. I had been broken open by betrayal, but had reassembled myself with greater wisdom and clearer boundaries. The room I occupied now was more than just physical space. It was a manifestation of my resilience, a tangible reminder that home is not merely where you grew up or where your belongings reside. Home is where you recognize your own value, where you are surrounded by people who see you clearly and love you honestly, and where you can stand firmly in the knowledge that your worth is not determined by others' treatment of you. In the quiet of my new beginning, I found peace not in forgetting what had happened, but in knowing that it no longer defined me. The room I had lost had been merely a space. The self I had found was an unshakable foundation on which to build whatever came next. What would you do if a family member betrayed your trust like my mother did? Would you fight back or walk away? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if my story resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe. Remember, sometimes the family we choose proves stronger than the family we're born into. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I hope it helps anyone facing similar struggles to find their own strength and path forward.